operations are synchronized automatically in the background whenever a cell connection or a Wi-Fi connection is found. Once the data is collected, we make it really easy for you to analyze it. So you can connect tools like Excel, Power BI, Python, R directly to ODK to build these really beautiful dashboards or automations with the platform. ODK is used by 2 million people to send about 250 million submissions every year. This graph is from the last few months. We have users in every country except for Greenland and North Korea. And the vast majority of these users are collecting data that makes the world a better place. So for example, the Red Cross uses ODK in pretty much every crisis response. WHO uses ODK globally in vaccinating tens of millions of kids every year. In the Philippines, the government is using it for a citizen science project to map all the mangroves in the country. And these are all sort of large scale use cases, but ODK is very accessible. There are middle schoolers who use it for their science fair projects and so on. So it's a very versatile platform. ODK is so widely used, I've started to call it the Land Cruiser of data collection. You see it in places where there's Land Cruisers. It's sort of the way things are done. Organizations trust ODK. Data collectors from all over the world have been trained on how to use it. Project managers know how to collect data from ODK. The app works on 22,000 different Android devices. It's been translated by the community into 60+ languages. We support the Gregorian calendar that you're all familiar with. We use that here in the US, but we also support the Ethiopian calendar. We support the Islamic calendar. We support the Myanmar calendar, the Buddhist calendar, I think is shipping next week. ODK has been used in cities. It's been used in jungles. It's been used at sea. Has it been used by a US president and former peanut farmer? Yes. It has been used by Jimmy Carter. He called it remarkable. Does it work in space? That's an excellent question. Yes. It's actually been used on the National Space Station. My point is, over the last 16 years, ODK has been pretty much used everywhere and for everything. Now, I know what you're thinking, but yeah, I don't collect data in space. I need to collect data on Earth, preferably about agriculture. That's a very fair point. So let me go through a few projects, some success stories of ODK use, particularly in agriculture, so you get a sense of how people use it. So the first you might have heard of is called ROMIS. I think it's pronounced ROMIS. This is the Rural Household Multi-Indicator Survey. That's a handful. It's an ILRI project where it's used ODK to collect about 54,000 interviews from farming households in about 36 countries. Because they use ODK, ROMIS can make these surveys that are both customizable, but also standardized. And so you can compare these data sets across a bunch of different cities, across a bunch of different countries. So you get more sort of power with your research. Another project is ECAS, which is all of these are acronyms. I'm sorry, I didn't name these projects. Enabling crop analytics at scale. This is a Tetra Tech project that used ODK to collect standardized ground truth about smallholder farms. So it's a standardized form that partners could use to go out and map a bunch of different farms. And the goal here is to build a pipeline where high quality data, standardized data could be used to train an AI model. AI is the theme here for crop detection and more. So a lot of that data comes through ODK. And then the last is a little different. This one is Ethos by Terragenesis. It helps brands, farmers, and buyers co-create these regenerative supply systems by responsibly collecting and sharing data. These are a few examples of, I think, a kind of more fun projects. I've got a few more I want to show you. The International Potato Center, I think most folks know the International Potato Center. They've used ODK for quite some time. There's a recent project where they digitized a gender transformative extension project in northern Ghana. A lot of the M&E came through ODK. ILRI uses, in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture in Uganda, uses ODK for meat inspection. IITA and the National Crop Research Institute in Nigeria. A lot of the real-time price data for these crops comes through ODK. Our friends at FAO use ODK to standardize their soil descriptions and assessments. And the World Food Program uses ODK for a lot of their food security assessments. So hopefully this gives you a sense of sort of the breadth, and this is just in agriculture. There's similar stories in health, in election monitoring, in crisis response. The usage is really quite extensive. ODK is an open source project. And so it's been used as the basis of a lot of other data collection platforms. There's a huge ecosystem there. That's a knife that cuts both ways. So because of that, ODK has sort of become a generic term, which makes it really hard to determine how these tools in the ecosystem are related. So I thought I'd take some time, sort of talk through that with you, and explain what I consider ODK, officially ODK, what's part of the broader ecosystem, and so on. So there are products that the ODK team makes, like the Collect mobile app and the ODK Central server. And then there are components that we produce as well that we maintain called XLS form, which you might have heard of, and the Enketo web forms. That's all part of ODK. And then we produce a bunch of different services. So we just launched ODK Cloud, which is a fully managed hosted solution for ODK. I'll talk about more of this later. So that's what I consider sort of officially ODK. There's the ecosystem. So if you've heard of ONA or Kobo or FormShare, these are all ODK compatible servers that use mostly current versions of ODK software that my team produces. Then there are tools like ComCare, Server CTO, Survey123. These all use ODK components, but they use very old versions of ODK components, so they tend not to be compatible. So a lot of the stuff that my team produces is the underlying technology for all of these products that you see here. So it really is a large ecosystem. I should mention the team. A lot of people think ODK is like an enormous team, but we have 15 people on the team currently, and 7 of them are full-time. So it's a very small team supporting millions of users. We're very efficient, I like to say. It hasn't been all great over the 16 years. It's been actually quite challenging. So I wanted to be transparent and honest about what are some of the things that we've struggled with over the years. Well, despite all the success, we have struggled. And I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is a comic from XKCD that I hacked up. This is a very common situation in open source projects where there's all this infrastructure built up on top, and underneath there's like a small component run by a small team that is holding up the entire system. So I think of ODK a lot like this, or historically has been that way. There are 3 big problems. The first is that as an open source project, you need resources to sort of build the stuff that people use. And we have found it very, very difficult over the years to incentivize people to contribute. To be direct, there are lots of organizations who have benefited greatly from ODK, who have not contributed back. Some of this is because of the permissive license that ODK has. You can really just take ODK and sell it. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. And many people do. That's the joy of producing a public good sometimes. So that has given us a lot of reach, but it's also resulted in a lot of free riding. That's the nature of a public good. The second issue has been just getting predictable and sensible resourcing. And by resourcing, I mostly mean we need to find money to pay developers to build a thing. There isn't a huge body of volunteer developers who want to work on a large, complex code base that's used in elections, for example, right? And so the reality is that for software to be great, there needs to be a paid team there. And that was historically very difficult for ODK because ODK was mostly funded by grants from Gates and a bunch of other partners, but it's very hard to build software, predictable software in that way. The third challenge is that ODK has always been framed as a community project, and it is a community project in many ways. It is a community project, but the reality was that there's a really small core group of people from one organization that's doing most or all of the work. And that community framing and the governance, because it wasn't sort of transparent, made it really hard for the doers of the project to make the critical decisions needed to solve these first 2 problems of contributions and resourcing. So we solved those problems. So over the last 3 years, we've taken a lot of these big problems that we talked about and solved them. And so ODK has now become the rare example of a sustainable public good, a sustainable open source project. So you might be wondering, well, how did you do it? Well, I'm going to talk about that coming right up. The 3 things we did. First is that we adjusted the governance to sort of empower the folks who are doing the work, the doers, to take more ownership and have the power to make decisions, sometimes unilaterally, and set the necessary priorities. So we just learned that for a lot of the folks who are actively working on the project, the priority was to produce an open source public good for the community and with the community, but it didn't have to be made by the community. And that was an important distinction because we didn't really need to be structured around volunteer labor or external contributions that were never going to come. We were spending a lot of time trying to get those things and they simply didn't exist. Secondly, we sort of accepted, I call it the single vendor reality. The reality was that ODK wasn't a multi-vendor project. There are a lot of vendors who benefit from the platform, but only one contributing back to the platform. So most of the work came from one organization, and that organization really wasn't capturing any of the value that was being produced. It made it really hard to keep going. So we communicated this sort of unsustainable nature of the work, the reality to the community, and we laid the groundwork for a big change. And so after a lot of conversations with key stakeholders, early funders, and so on, we launched ODK Cloud. So ODK Cloud is the exact same ODK software, but it's fully hosted and fully managed by the ODK team. It comes with support from the team, and it's a paid service. It's not I would say like 90% of people who use ODK don't use ODK Cloud, but the 10% that do it, because it's such a large community, provides enough revenue for us to sustain ODK meaningfully. So how has it gone? It's been a win-win. Our customers, they get this really nice, well-managed, well-supported software service in ODK Cloud. And we take the money from that to pay a great team of designers, developers, and testers to keep improving ODK. And those who can't afford ODK Cloud can still self-host the exact same software on their own infrastructure in country. And again, most people do that. So it's been a win-win. We're shipping major features every month. The sort of acceleration of features provided by this sort of stable, predictable resourcing has allowed us to just ship much, much faster, and usage is growing. Here's monthly revenue. I've hidden the numbers because that would be gauche or whatnot, but we launched at the end of 2021, and you can see that this is monthly recurring revenue. The amount of money that we get it arrives every month, which is great for hiring people, and it increases every month. So we're able to do so much more because we have this model in place. We still pursue grants, but only when they are in alignment with where our community needs to be and the roadmap of the project. So we still pursue grants when it's catalytic and we can make it work, but we don't need to, and that is a huge difference for the project. We're still very community oriented, but instead of the older governance structures that are in a lot of open source projects, we built more direct feedback loops. So one example of this is ODK Insiders. We just launched this a couple of months ago. So there are people who are active on our community forum. We have about 15,000 people from all over the world who participate in this forum, community of practice, and about 150 of them are very enthusiastic users of ODK. And so the more you participate, you get leveled up into the ODK Insiders program, where you get ongoing monthly calls with the core team. You get to network with other insiders and build your skills. So there's showcases and deep dives and office hours. And these folks get to work with us and shape the roadmap. It's not a permanent program. The moment you stop participating, you drop out. And so that has been a huge win also, because it means that only people who are in the field, in the trenches, using the software can influence how the software is shaped. We have other ways of gathering feedback, but this one has been really important as far as engaging with the community over time. And they're beautiful people, look at them. Here are a few of them from our recent call. Folks from all over the world in different sectors, and it's usually a fun time talking about data collection. You wouldn't think data collection would be fun, but we really have a lot of fun. You see a lot of smiles. Everybody's pretty happy. So you don't have to take my word for it that it's a win-win. Here's a recent quote from a user. This person is not a customer. This is a user who uses the open source platform. There's a rich and vibrant community. The developer team very proactive in engaging with users, and perhaps the best thing about ODK though is that it's always improving. And I love this quote because it shows that despite some of the very painful changes that we made to the structure of the project, ODK is still ODK, and the more improvements we can make, the more impact we can have over time. So what are some lessons learned that I can share with everybody that you could potentially apply to your work when it comes to communities and building technologies? I can think of 5 lessons. The first is my personal favorite. Like, open source isn't magic. When we started the project, it definitely felt like magic, but over time, folks have realized that open source is a beautiful way to build software. I mean, I personally enjoy it a lot, doing things that are highly transparent and allows others to build on it. But it really only solves the problem of making the source code of the technology available. It doesn't help with projects that every successful software project has to help. You know, you have to ultimately you have to do sales, you have to do marketing, you have to do operations, you have to do management, strategy, legal, finance. All these things have to be done in order to have a successful project. And open source doesn't solve those problems. You have to solve them some other way. And in many ways, making the code open source makes every one of those problems harder to solve. Because the thing that you produce that is the most value, you give it away. And that's really important when it's a public good, but it's unlikely that you get anything back. So there needs to be some thinking about how you solve those other problems when you open source a project. The second thing is that community only goes so far. It only gets you so far. We have an amazing community, 15,000 people, I said. They contribute bug reports, translations, feature requests. We're doing a meetup later today. I mean, so it's fantastic community, but all those contributions also end up generating work. And so we need people to do that work, and those people, that work is hard, it's necessary, and so it's not a kind of thing a volunteer can do. And so although we had like lots of organizations with developers who use and benefit from ODK, we really did not have a community of developers to do that. And so we've tried lots of things over the years to try to fix that problem. Ultimately, it never worked because of how incentives were lined up. I'm going to talk about those incentives in just a second. One thing that I personally didn't understand and leadership didn't understand when we started the project was that the very structure of the project was setting harmful incentives. So in open source particularly, if you have a small library of maybe low-level code, open source is a fantastic option because developers who need that code and who build on top of that code have a huge incentive to participate and reduce the work required. It's a shared component. It's like sharing engines in the car, or, you know, but when you have a large user-facing product like ODK, there's zero incentive to share because it's a complete product. And so organizations are just more incentivized to take that product, white label it, sell it, or whatnot. And we just didn't, it took us so long to understand that concept. So it's true that a lot of these organizations who benefited from ODK were spreading the word. And that was fantastic and great. But in many ways, we're setting ourselves on fire to keep other people warm. You know, it just wasn't, it was never going to work. I mean, we did it for a long time, though. I mean, so 12 years is a pretty good run before we made these changes. The funding sources really matter. So historically, ODK had been funded with grants and consulting dollars. And we're so grateful that we had these funds because it allowed the project to grow and kick off. But these funding sources have a lot of challenges that make it really hard to build sustainable software. The first is that, and most of you know about the grant cycle, the money would often come at the wrong time. And so software development, since it's a farming group, software development is like farming. You know, you have to plant at certain times. And if the inputs aren't available when it's time to plant, you're going to have a very hard season. And so when the money was arriving at the wrong time, it made it impossible to build software that users could trust. Another thing is that the money might not meet the project's needs. You know, these days, all the available funding grants are for AI. So guess what? If you need money, you're going to be incentivized to build AI features, whether or not your project, your users, your customers need it. You just need the revenue. So that's not great either. And then the last thing is that working to hit grant timelines or consulting timelines always incentivizes shortcuts. And when we started ODK, it was supposed to be a small academic research. It was part of my PhD work, small project. We test the thing, we're done. 16 years later, it's like a big thing. And so we know now that we're building something for the long term. And when you have a grant deadline or a contract deadline paid with short-term people, they're going to take shortcuts. And we really can't afford shortcuts. People really trust ODK. You know, we have a project in Honduras, 50,000 data collectors out in the field. Like, the software has to work. And so shortcuts are totally unacceptable for the work we do. And so if the revenue sources incentivize shortcuts, it's just not possible for us to like build the trust that we need for our users. And so, like I said, we still, ODK Cloud solved these problems for us because it's software as a service, predictable amount of money every month. The amount of money tends to go up every month. So we can hire people for the long term and build features that last. We don't want to be here in the next 10 years, we want to be there in the next 100 years. So we still apply for grants from foundations and the like, but only if we are sure that it'll come at the right time and it meets the actual needs of our projects rather than a need to sort of get revenue. Finally, at the end of the day, showing up every day, being kind, being transparent, helping folks be successful is the biggest difference maker. I think a lot of our customers who sign up for demos, are very surprised when I show up on the call. They're like, don't you have something better to do? The demo, talking to customers, that is the most important thing that I do. And so I think people are always very surprised by the culture of the team because everybody's very responsive and we're committed to helping folks collect their data. People are also very surprised when I suggest other tools. My job isn't to convince you to use ODK. My job is to help you pick a tool that works well for your use case. Sometimes that's ODK, sometimes it's not, and that's okay too. And so that's something that's been there at the very beginning of the project and is carried through with the team. I think people really appreciate it. So we've built a lot of trust over that with the consistency, and that trust has enabled us to make a lot of these changes that ensures that ODK continues to grow. So now that ODK has a stronger foundation, what are we going to do with all of that? What's next? I can't do a live demo. It's not my laptop and everything, but I got you some slides. What's next is called entities. And this is maybe a little bit more technical. So historically with ODK, you go out, you collect data with the form, and then you come back, you do analysis, and that's the end of it. Folks really love using ODK and they want to build workflows around it. And so we've created this new concept called entities. And entities store data about people, places, and things that may change over time. They have a longitudinal component. And you can use entities to power workflows like creating, reading, and updating entities with forms. This has been our most requested feature. And it just took a lot of work to do. And the structural changes that we made to the project enabled us to take on that long-term multi-year project that has shipped this feature. And essentially the way is when you collect data, it stores it as an entity, and then you can reuse that data in your follow-up forms and so on. So for example, this is a follow-up form. You've presumably registered a participant or a farm or something like that. You can look that person up and see their contact details. So you can now use ODK to build more workflows, more service delivery, and sort of use the data that you're collected to drive your workflows forward. Way too hard to explain in slides. So if you have a project that you think might need entities, hop onto the website, request a demo, and you probably get the demo with me, and we can walk through your use case together. So before we open up the floor for some questions, I wanted to say a big thank you for having me and thank everybody here for the work that you do. You often have a choice in how you live your life, what opportunities you take on. And the fact that you're in this room means that you've made the choice to help address some of these challenges in food systems around the world. And so I want to do a personal thank you for that. And so with that, let's open up the floor for questions. If you're shy, I have email. I'm obsessed with email. I respond to every email. You can find me on LinkedIn. And then there's an ODK meetup tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Suit House in DC. Google it if you can't find it. I'll be there. Some other ODKers will be there. So if you want to chit chat about ODK, open source or whatever, you're always welcome to come join. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yaw. What an inspiring story. And I think the trajectory of ODK and your dedication can inspire everyone, especially our next gen ambassadors, to appreciate ICTforAg tools that are designed and developed for connecting users in remote areas. So we do now have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'll ask anyone in the room to raise your hand for questions to ask. And for the online audience, please type your question in the chat and we will have someone in the room relay them here. We've already got a few audience questions, so I'll start you off with one. Given the size of the ODK community, there must be a lot of new features always being asked from users around the world. So what are some of these most frequently requested features and what's your strategy to address them?
That's a great question. Yeah, we do get a lot of feature requests. A couple of ways I would answer that. The first thing is that we have to be very conservative about what we add to ODK. The example of the Honduras project was 50,000 projects. Every time we add a new feature to ODK, when you push out that feature to those millions of users, it means you're potentially disrupting work. Any change you make could also introduce a bug, and that bug doesn't even have to be like something malicious. You could just change behavior that is subtle in some way. So we have to be very thoughtful about what features we take on. The second thing is that we have to be very thoughtful about how those features are sequenced. A lot of our users they don't have a formal education. Some of them cannot read. And so just shipping a bunch of features that don't have a cohesive story behind it can be a huge challenge. So we've learned over the years, we have a process for doing that. Essentially, we look at usage analytics. We talk to a lot of users directly. We do a lot of projects, and we look at the landscape. We look at what makes sense as far as like storytelling to explain to users. And that's what determines what features can be shipped. We often don't build features that are narrow for a particular use case. If somebody has a narrow healthcare use case, we don't build it unless we know that it can generically apply to all users of ODK. And so that's how we do it. It's more art than science, but we just try to be very thoughtful. The most important thing is that we have to be very thoughtful about not disrupting ongoing work and building features that will last for the long term. I think Mark Zuckerberg used to say, move fast and break things. Yeah, we don't do that. We move fast, but we don't break things. I think that's the best way to do it.
Great, great. And we also have another question coming from the audience about case management.
Yes.
So what's your plan to incorporate this?
Yeah, so entities, case managed, for those who don't know, is essentially, a case is a term for, an instance of a thing that you open and close, basically. So if you're doing, say, you're tracking pregnancies, you would open a case when the woman is pregnant and you close it when the child is delivered. There are a lot of platforms out there that do case management. ODK's entities, pardon me, ODK's entities feature it can be used for case management, and that's why we built it. I would say, though, that there's like a hidden question inside that question. That is to say, ODK is not a case management tool. It's not a community health worker tool. It's a data collection platform. And so sometimes the case management that you're doing has very specific workflows that you need to implement. And if there's a turnkey solution for that, you should absolutely use it because it's really purpose-built. If your use case doesn't fit that whatever that standard software is, and you need a little more flexibility and adjustability, that's when ODK is a good fit. So for example, we have some folks who are like the malaria clinical trials that proved that the recent vaccine was safe. All that was done offline. So there's great clinical trial software, but there isn't great offline clinical trial software. And so in those cases, ODK was a good fit for those clinical trials. So, if you're running a community health worker program, there's software like ComCare that's fantastic for community health worker case management programs. If you're not doing something that is running a national scale community health worker program, then the entities feature is fantastic for use.
Great, great. And I'd encourage the audience to propose some of their own questions. I saw lots of nodding and things. Okay, it looks like we have a question over here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is really very interesting. One question I had for you, though, are you looking to take the data that is, so people are using your software.
Yeah.
What do you have in terms of access to the data? Can you move next to large language model, or only the people capturing the data have access to that data?
Yeah, for sure. A very important thing is that we don't have any access to the data. Our position is to be essentially a vendor to produce a piece of software. So in the same way, I guess this is changing in the same way that like Microsoft Word generates a Word document, you put whatever is in that document and it's your content. ODK is exactly the same. You design your own forms, you collect your own data, you use that data however you see fit. We just provide the infrastructure for you to do that. And that's whether or not you're using ODK Cloud on our infrastructure or you're self-hosting it. It's your data. We don't look at it. We provide great transparency for you to confirm that we don't do that. And we don't want to touch any of that stuff. It's yours.
So my question would be, though, would you consider that? Because what happens mostly when we're talking in agriculture,
Yeah.
a lot of that information. So part of the problem is the dissemination of data. Everybody's capturing it, but
Yes.
nobody. So what I'm using it in a way that I believe is helping the community, but it's
Mhm.
not really helping, and it's not allowing me to do any kind of comparison.
Yeah.
So have you guys thought of using large language model, but in a way which allows also for the privacy to then be able to redistribute the results? Because I think that's the thing that's missing in the space right now.
Yeah, I think in general, we want to put a firewall between the sort of the tools that we provide and any sort of decision making that's done around the tool or any sort of derivative products that are built around the tool. I think in our line of work, trust is the most important thing that we have, trust in the brand and trust in what the software does. And so this will most certainly come up. But when it comes to things like large language models and artificial intelligence, we have to be very conservative about how these things are rolled out, at least within ODK. We want people to trust that when they deploy a form, that it's collecting exactly what they expect, that there's transparency around what it's doing, how it's doing it, And anything that touches that, we want to be very conservative about. As far as enabling others to sort of make sense of that data, we think a lot of that stuff has to do with, is very context dependent and relies on experts in whatever field that they're using. And so we don't have the expertise in healthcare and agriculture and elections and crisis response to build technology that can empower you. Our job is to make it very, very easy for you to hook up ODK to whatever downstream systems or upstream systems that you need to make your decision making. So tools like, for example, ChatGPT, instead of designing a form manually, yeah, you can absolutely talk to ChatGPT today, and we'll design you a nice ODK form. Or if you want to do some analysis with ODK data that you've collected in ODK, you can absolutely ask ChatGPT to draw some graphs and those kinds of things. We don't want to bake that into the software because until we have full transparency into what these kinds of technologies do and how they do it, it's not a good fit for the kind of work that we do.
Great answer. And is ODK being used by local rural farming communities without formal training in the global south? This is a question from the online audience.
Yeah, for sure. One example is there's a farm in Argentina, 74,000 hectares, pretty big. It's a cattle ranch, and most of the employees there aren't literate, and they use ODK for a lot of automation and management of the farm. So I know of at least that. Again, most of our users, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, don't have a formal education. The first ODK project ever was actually in Uganda. It was an agriculture project. Rural farmers, they didn't have any formal education. So we work really hard to lower the technical bar, at least with the mobile app. So folks who don't have a lot of training or experience can find success with it, and they do.
Great, and we have another one here online. Can we have an automated analysis able to download and share a report directly without any extra analysis using other softwares?
Yeah, we have a small team, and so we have to be very thoughtful about what things we take on. We can always grow the team, but a large team is less agile. And so we right now don't think we can compete with a Power BI or a Tableau. Those are multi-billion-dollar companies doing great work, building business intelligence software that work great. And so I don't think we have a competitive advantage there. Instead, what our focus has been so far is just make it easy to connect it. So it really is, when you get your ODK data, you copy a link from ODK, you paste it in Excel, and that Excel worksheet will automatically update as the data comes in. It really is like copy it from here to here. And then you have all the tools available in Google Sheets, Power BI, and you can use those kinds of systems. But if the person who's asking the question has a very rich uncle or aunt who wants to sponsor this feature, we will certainly consider it. But you have to understand that Power BI, these things are multi-billion-dollar pieces. It's not a small thing to take on. I wish I could do it, but I'm already gray. I'm already all gray. I can't do more.
Do we have another question from the room? We have two. Here, we'll start with who has the microphone.
Okay, so I have the microphone. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I've been using ODK for like 7 or 8 years right now. I'm currently consulting an agrarian research group in India that conducts some 60,000 user survey in villages, and they are still using paper.
Yes.
And a question that I constantly get asked is, while we're testing ODK and a competitor, what differentiates ODK from Qualtrics? Because that is what we are competing against with them. So I have my own assessment, but I'd like to hear from you. What's the differentiator as a product?
Well, I think there's probably a huge pricing difference between Qualtrics and ODK.
Ignore the financials.
Well, you can't ignore the financials. If you're a small project in India and you have a very rich uncle or aunt, then maybe you could use
They've got very rich uncle and aunt.
I don't spend a lot of time looking at what other folks are doing as far as like competitors or whatnot. But I will say that I think ultimately it's about what the priorities of the project are. So ODK is like exclusively focused on, not exclusively, but like we do a lot of offline data collection. My guess is that if you go to the Play Store or the iOS store and you look at Qualtrics offline, it's not going to be great. So that's the first thing. The second thing is like the complexity of the forms. Qualtrics probably can't scan fingerprints. It probably can't connect to external soil samples. So the forms that are doable in ODK can be very powerful and complex, which enables a lot of use cases. Then the other thing is also like the vibes, I think it's like the culture of the project. The question is, does Qualtrics have a 16-year history of supporting your use case? Can you reach out to the Qualtrics CEO to chat about the feature? We are 100% committed to collecting data on social impact. That's all we've done for 16 years. That's all we're going to do. businesses change. What we've been doing for a long time. So, you know, the beautiful thing about software, there's like lots of solutions. And so if you find one that fits your use case, that's awesome. You know, we don't have to be the only data collection platform that people use.
We have another question here in the back.
Yeah, so the question is, since ODK sort of aggregates all this data, how do you validate it? So the first thing that we don't validate it. People choose to deploy ODK. They may have a farmer registration project or an M&E project. So they design forms that collect the data that they think is valuable. They get the data through ODK, and then they can make their own decisions on that particular data. So it's not something that like we produce. You know, it's not a platform where, you know, people have to decide to use it, build their own forms, decide on their own indicators, collect the data, analyze it themselves, and so on and so forth. So we don't make any of those decisions for them.
We have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Yes.
For example, I decide I want to use the data on ODK. From what I'm understanding, you say, and I have to decide, hey, I believe the data on here is accurate, and then just follow that inference going forward.
Yeah, so either if you're using ODK Cloud, you have a subscription, you download it. If you're setting up yourself, yeah, you design it. You have to believe that your data collection is doing the right thing or whatever, but we help there too. So there's lots of features in ODK. I don't call it cheating because we don't think data collectors should be cheating, but there might be poorly trained data collectors who are not actually at the site collecting the data. We have lots of features to help you verify that people are collecting data at a particular place, at a particular time. We know that you can collect their device ID, you see their GPS location, whether or not you're in a particular place. So all those things are there to help you validate that the data is true. The other thing I should mention is that there's also support for change tracking, because people do use ODK for clinical trials. So not just we know where you are, where you collect the data, but also as you're editing the data, we provide visibility there as well. So you know that somebody collected this data and then Bob came in and changed it from X to Y, and you see that whole trail as well. It's a lot of transparency features built in.
Okay, it looks like we're coming to the close of the Q&A session, so we maybe have time for one more with the microphone over here.
Thank you. I have 3 quick questions.
Oh boy. Hopefully I have 3 quick answers.
You let
Be
them
one
go
bit
over
almost.
time. So first, I want to commend you for your excellent work and for sharing that sequence of wise, pragmatic decisions that you've made over time to make your work sustainable. So congratulations. That's excellent. First question is, do you support standardized data dictionaries for the variables that people are collecting? Like, do you have a standardized code for temperature, or does each, or do you have like complete multi-tenancy where each user makes up their own set of codes?
I'll try to make it quick. Yes, each user makes their own data dictionary. It's really hard to get people to collaborate. What happens is that usually in a particular domain, like in health or in agriculture, there's some sort of consortium and they decide like what we call the variables, but ODK doesn't have any built-in support to like guarantee that, you know, data dictionaries in that way.
Second question. I assume that you have a set of APIs so that people can pull their own data to analyze ex post and so forth. So
yes, and an important thing about the API is that sometimes people ship APIs that are like after the fact. And so the APIs tend to be garbage. I know this because the first versions of ODK did exactly that. We have APIs that the core team has to use to build the application. I don't like to call it like eating my own dog food. We drink our own champagne. So the APIs are fast, they're reliable, they're secure because we use them. They're well documented. So yes, we have APIs out the wazoo, lots of APIs.
perfect. Third question. Do you have any plans for iOS support? Thinking about broadening your base?
I have an iOS phone. I'm a Mac guy. I've been for a long time. The reality is that there isn't a strong business case for it. Most of our users use Android phones. And so it is what it is. There are, I think, close to like 2 million lines of code in the mobile client alone. It's just a lot to take on. And it's just cheaper for us to just like, if you need iOS, we'll literally just buy you an Android phone. it'd be cheaper. But there's good news that we just launched a new web forms project to rebuild a client rebuild a client in iOS in the web browser, and that will work great on iOS. And so you will get a PWA in a couple of months that will work great on iOS.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Fantastic. Well, we're seeing the Elmos, which means we've come to the close of the session. So thanks again, Yaw, for such an amazing story of ODK. Next, we will have the chance to hear from a distinguished panel of ICT practitioners to discuss more on what it means to localize ICT.